All right. Well, kids have been telling us for decades. So most of you are aware that the CDC supposedly every 2 years, but now it's been a little behind, does a youth risk survey via the risk surveillance system or a behavioral risk surveillance system. And they survey high school students from across the country, thousands of them, and have been doing so since 1991. So they have literally millions of survey responses across decades. So I was interested in terms of, kind of the patterns of behavioral health challenges and so forth. So the last survey was done in 2017, and externalizing related issues or outcomes, you can see over here, significant numbers of students carried a weapon in school, carried a gun to school, were threatened or injured, bullied, and, didn't go to school because they felt unsafe. I don't think that surprises anybody. We're working on this, and of course there's more work to do. One of the most surprising things to me was around internalizing issues, especially the fact that 31% of kids reported that they felt persistent feelings of hopelessness. Persistent meaning that they felt hopeless every day consecutively for 2 or more weeks within the last 12 months. 17% considered suicide within the last 12 months. 14% developed a plan. 7% attempted, and over 3% had an injury that was significant enough to send them to the ER, which doesn't sound like a hugely high rate, but if you consider the average high school of 1,000 students, 170 students are considering suicide. 140 of them developed a plan. 70 of them attempted. That's crazy. And so it was hard for me to really kind of grasp that. And I'll talk about that in a minute. The other thing, though, is this isn't a new problem. We're kind of getting a new perspective on it. But if you look across time from 91 to 2017, the rates of kids who attempted suicide is fairly stable. We just, in the old days, really didn't look at it too hard. We had crisis teams for when kids attempted or completed, and we had hotlines for when they were so bad off, they're about on the edge of doing it, they have one last person to call. Instead of really significantly putting emphasis on preventing this stuff. Suicide is one of the most common causes of death for our youth, and this is nothing new or no surprise. And negative affect, anxiety, depression, negative thoughts is a significant contributor to this. So what really helped ground these numbers in reality for me was a woman I work with in Colorado, and I don't know, I was going to name the district, but I don't think I will. We had an item 24 debacle, we call that. So in the BISMA system, item 24 assesses thoughts of self-harm. And this must be the first site that actually had students participate in the universal screening. So they had teachers do the screening, and they also had students do it. And they went from identifying around 20 kids with thoughts of self-harm via the teacher rating to around 200 when they did the student rating. And a piece of the BIMUS is if that item is endorsed at a level higher than 0, meaning they have any kind of frequency of thoughts of self-harm, it automatically emails the case manager and the principal so that somebody can follow up. Well, they had 200 of them, and unfortunately, they did the screening on a Friday. So we had a very long weekend in trying to help them plan for their response. But when we did the numbers, 200 kids was about 17% of that school. So it's actual reality. I mean, those student responses are accurate, I believe. And so these are the things we're trying to prevent: externalizing difficulties, internalizing problems, or lessen the effect of internalizing difficulties, and also cognitive and attention problems, which we really haven't talked about, because it's not folks, committing suicide or going to jail, but it is a significant difficulty in terms of keeping up with the Common Core, especially. Right? So I think it's time for a change. All the stuff we do around kids' social, emotional, and behavioral health is backwards. We provide a whole bunch of energy at the end of the line when it's too late to really help them, and the interventions we use typically aren't all that effective. And so I'm really impressed with the work that a lot of districts have done recently in terms of prevention and social emotional learning and infusing that curriculum into the classroom. From my mind, we need to abandon our old practices, which I call RTC, responding to crisis, and start spending our time, responding to intervention. So even though we know 20% of kids, and in Syracuse it was much higher than that, are going to develop a diagnosable mental health difficulty, behavioral health screenings occur in less than 5% of districts across the country. For the life of me, I can't understand why. On the one hand, the scientist part of me says, I can't believe we're not doing this. On the other hand, the person working in the schools forever is saying, I know why, right? The first time I brought this up to my special ed director in the 90s, who was a great guy, I valued him. He was a very politically savvy special ed director. He was a very charged environment. He'd been there a long time. He's very smart. And we were doing great things in the area of literacy and interventions with kids. I said, we really need to do the same thing around students in their emotional and behavioral development. I'd like to screen kids for that and try and intervene earlier than we usually do. And he goes, oh crap, Jim. He goes, if we screened all the kids in the building and found all these behavioral health concerns or mental health concerns, we'd have to do something about it. And I said, Ed, that's the dumbest thing I ever heard you say. Which he didn't like very much. But I was like, we already do something about it. We kick them out of school. We suspend them. We have the state, rip us a new one because we got suspensions that are so high. I got a scrapbook full of kids that I consulted on in alternative settings that eventually went to jail, that were involved in shootings and robberies and all this other stuff. But we weren't brave enough, to be honest with you, to identify them early so we could do something about it. So we just sat back and waited until the inevitable unfold.